Hello and welcome to Coach, a show about perspective. I'm Coach Samuel Barclough, founder of the VA Titans. Here with us today we have Coach Allison.
Hey everybody.
And Coach Corey of the VA Titans. Special guest today will be Eugene Holloman. Everybody welcome. I'm glad y'all can take a minute out your day. Eugene, I appreciate you giving us a little time from your day. Today we got with us Coach Corey also.
What's going on?
And we also have Allison.
Hey, everybody.
Allison, why don't you tell us a little bit about our guest?
Okay. Today we are joined by Eugene Holloman. He is a Virginia Beach native who attended Bayside High School, where he played football and went on to James Madison University to be a two-time all-conference running back during his time there. Holloman is the author of 2 novels, The Athlete Student Freshman Year and The Athlete Student Sophomore Year. He currently works in leadership at a Fortune 500 healthcare company and is pursuing his doctorate at Regent University. Holloman's goal through writing and through sports is to reach as many student athletes as he can in the hopes to inspire them and their choices through his story. Welcome.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
Welcome, brother.
Thank you.
And I will say one thing, I'm being truthful, because even Coach Corey knows, like, I like to make a lot of our players read. But we'll sit right there and be like, hey, look, man, y'all just write an essay, have it next week. If you don't got it for the game, you're going to play. And when I tell you they're coming out with the little papers out their pockets, they don't go in and showing them, I'm like, all right, that's what's up. That's all you want, you know. So I was very excited to, because I do a lot of reading. There's my wife. And I was just excited to stumble upon one of your books that I finished. And I was like, okay, local, this is good. You know, African-American man showing exactly, look, you got no clue what it means, because we all coach a lot of these young youth and we get around them. But to be able to show the example, because in their minds, they want to argue everything. But when I go to my son, can be like, go ahead and take this, go ahead and read a chapter of it. Then I tell him to read another chapter. Okay, go ahead and write me a little essay on those 2 chapters. And then he come back to me, Dad, and said, Dad, you know, he kind of described a situation that I dealt with. And I was like, oh, wow, you can relate to that, huh? Good. So it's a blessing to be able to do that. And I always try to promote people who do that, because people need that. You know, what you do now lasts. And I just wanted to kind of at least say that much for you right now, because it's the truth. I definitely appreciate it.
So, Coached is a show about perspectives, and we've got the great perspective of having coaches and former players with us. So I wanted to explore that topic a little bit through some different questions. A driving force for Eugene in writing his book, and a topic that often comes up between coaches and athletes, is understanding the importance of not just being an athlete, but being a student athlete. So how does it change the perspective when we add that word student in, and why is that so important?
Is that to me?
Yeah, you can start it off.
Yeah, so I didn't want to just jump in and kind of hog the spotlight here, but I think, you know, being a student athlete, people don't realize, or students don't realize, or even parents, is that it's like having 2 full-time jobs, right? It's 2 8-hour shifts. And that's almost impossible. Like I barely work over, 10, 11 hours a day. But say if I had 2 jobs doing that, it's little time. But then you throw in the partying, right? The socializing, and trying to balance those 3 things is quite difficult. So a wise man once told me that you have time for 2 things in college. But there's 3 things fighting for your attention. There's a student part, there's an athlete part, and there's a socializing, right? And so as an 18, 19-year-old kid, you got to do football because they're paying for your education. So now you're stuck between socializing and the student part. And at 19, you're so immature, and it's, you know, everybody's partying and looking like they're having a good time. I'm going to choose socializing, right? And I'll try to, you know, study here and there when I can, or maybe an hour before a class. But then you keep doing that over time, and it comes back to bite you. It comes back to haunt you when you have to select the easiest major that the university has to offer, or your GPA dips below 2.0, right? And so those are things that we don't necessarily educate our kids on, and it's a balance, right? And if we spend too much time on one thing, we can constantly lose our perspective.
How do you feel about that, Corey?
I think Eugene hit it right on the nail. Me being a former student athlete myself, that is, I mean, those are the three things you for sure battle with as being a student athlete. And like he said, as a 19-year-old kid, the first thing you're going to choose is the social aspect of it. Because you got to think, a lot of 19-year-old athletes, you know, they've been with their parents the whole time, and they feel like they have a sense of freedom when they hit the college campus. So you got to think, and you do have max freedom when you do hit college by yourself. Your parents drop you off, and it's like you're in your dorm room, and you're like, no, I'm by myself. Like, I'm on my own. Oh, my goodness. And then all the other kids around you, they're the same way. All the other athletes, students, they're the same way. Like, we have no parents. Do y'all know that? So it kind of makes everybody come together, and you know, you immediately start to bond relationships, and you start to, usually the first person you meet in college, or as far as student athletes, especially with freshmen, all of a sudden, the first person that talks to you is like most likely the person you're going to stick with throughout your journey. They're going to go on that journey with you. So, yeah, man, I think that's I mean, he hit it on the nail. I mean, there's not even too much to say about that because Eugene pretty much, he nailed that. So, yeah, so the social aspect is definitely the hardest choice not to make, for sure.
I think the perspective that I'm gonna have on it is, I guess I look at just the athletic side of it, not the student athlete, like the difference as far as that. And I think an athlete is just a proficient person, you know, as far as that student athlete, like y'all been saying. It's three different hats, you know what I mean? And it truly is that you got to recognize and understand that and prepare the youth for it, or whatever age group. And I think that's the big piece. You got to be prepared for that. I don't know how many of them are prepared for that. You know?
So what advice would you all give to the player who's trying to balance their academic curriculum with what's needed to give a high level quality performance on the field or the court, and who's also trying to be a kid or be young? You know,
I would say foresight. I mean, foresight is something that, you know, a lot of kids, you know, don't have experience with. But if you tell a kid, like, what do you want your life to be like, you know, 5-10 years from now? And they constantly are weighing each decision of how they want their life to look in the future, I think it will put it in perspective of, all right, I'm gonna make my main thing the main thing, right? I have to take care of athletics, right? I'm here for that, right? But then it comes the school part. The school part, man, that education piece, that never leaves you. That right. The athletic piece, it can leave you, right? You can get injured. Someone else can come in and take your spot, and you get relegated to the bench. But that education piece, man, that will be with you until you leave this earth. And so if you can understand that, if kids can, and we can teach that to kids, it will take them such a long way. I mean, I was looking at an old game that they put on YouTube from JMU, and I was coming off a knee injury, and I didn't even recognize myself, right? And you know, that doesn't mean much to me anymore. But the things that I learned, right? I'm still teaching my kids these things. It's still relevant today, right? That education, when you first start learning, when you're born, it just never leaves you. But athletics, man, it can leave you swiftly.
I guess I'll go next. I would tell kids you got to have balance. You have to understand the value of balance. Most kids who go to college, especially athletes, I always tell them, I can't tell you not to have fun. That's unrealistic. You know what I'm saying? That's so unrealistic to say, go to college, don't have fun. Just be an athlete and go to school. No. But you have to understand balance. You got to know when, because as a student athlete, you're going to be faced with a lot of choices where, do I go study for this test or do I go work on my game? Do I go study for this test or do I go party? Do I go party and I got a game the next day? So there's so many choices you're going to be faced with as an athlete that you have to make the right choice, even if it kills you. A little story. I remember a friend of mine, Hodges Smith, who I was great leader for me when I hit the college campus. He was never afraid to say, "Not today," you know.
Yeah,
I got you Saturday. And he was so dedicated to being a student first, you know, and an athlete second. And he used to always tell me that, man, you're a student first and you're an athlete second. I used to be like, no, we're on scholarship. We're athletes first and students second. You know what I'm saying? Because I'm a 19-year-old kid, like he said, and he's in the sophomores. He said, no, man, you're a student first. You're an athlete second. So he was so disciplined with taking care of his business in the classroom and letting everything else. I mean, and it still never seemed like he was missing in action. It's just he put a lot of things on pause because he was like, hey, I'm playing at a Division I school. The likelihood of me going pro is not, you know, it's not high. So at the end of the day, I would tell kids it's that balance aspect. You got to know when to make the right choices because you're going to be, as a student athlete, you're going to be faced with a lot of decisions and making the wrong choice. And I'm saying this from experience, making the wrong choice. It may seem like it feels good in the moment, but in the long run, it comes back to haunt you. Definitely.
right.
That's definitely true, especially with me with older kids. Not to say everybody don't got older ones, but the demographic is crazy. I got 20, 21-year-old and a 14-year-old. So it's just, and you got to have that humbling discipline. You know, so many times my oldest, he'll sit there and be like, he'll tell my youngest, hey, just go ahead and listen to dad, man. Just go ahead. If he's saying do it, just do it. And it's one thing these kids gotta be able to say, like you said before, not today. You know, and I noticed that they really got to be that strong. And sometimes it's going to be at the cost of your so-called friends. Sometimes it's going to be at the cost of the girl you like. I mean, it's going to be a cost. There's a cost. It costs to be what you need to be. It's going to cost to be great. It really is. And I don't think these kids, they do got it in them, but sometimes they just scared and they feel alone. But every last student athlete is in the same boat. You know, they want to think they're all in little dinghies on the side, but they're in the same boat. And they got to quit thinking that there's a separatism. It's got to be, like you said, student and athlete. And I get it, the athletic part, like Eugene said earlier, that's what got you there, along with the mindset. Like you said, to sustain that, you sometimes had to take on courses that weren't the strongest courses, or you had to, you know, so that you can make sure you can balance both. So I definitely agree with you on that.
Can I say one more thing to that? I think us as mentors, too, leaders and coaches, I think that we have to be realistic with our kids as well because, you know, we're always embedding in their head, be a student, be a student, be a student. Don't do nothing else but be a student. But I think that us as mentors and leaders, we also have to give kids the realities of life of what they're going to face, you know, instead of just trying to, you know, embed in their heads, be this way, you know. Just wanted to add that.
And Coach C, you mentioned a very important part too. The young man that you were talking about, who was a leader, that he didn't necessarily, you know for sure he was going to go to the league. You ask, you know, any kid, their first thing is like, yeah, I'm going to the league. And so, right. And so, I mean, we have to be real about that without shooting anyone's dreams down. Everybody is not going to make it, right? Everybody can't make it. Then if we look at the numbers, you know, is a small percentage that actually do. And so we do have to take advantage of, you know, what's after sports. And it's tough because we mentally grind, we physically grind, we tell ourselves, man, I'm the best one on this field. And we have to do that as athletes. But when we do that too, we say that, all right, since I am the best, I'm going to make it to, the zenith of whatever sport that I'm, participating in. And sometimes, we just need to hear that from others that, man, it's going to end one day.
Yep, absolutely.
I agree with that.
So Coach C brought up something important, and he talked about how mentoring as a coach is really important and is a big part of the job. So I think that we can all agree that communication on and off the court has a lot to do with that relationship that's built between the players and the coach. So if we break communication down a little bit and we think about the basic like 3 dimensions of it. So we have the sending and receiving of messages. We've got verbal communication, nonverbal communication, and then we've got the content of the message versus the emotion of the message. So when we look at all those different aspects, what is the role of the coach and what's the role of the player, and how can we make sure there's effective communication taking place between coaches and players?
That's a good question.
That one off. I'll take the perspective of the
That's a
coach.
really good question.
I think that the responsibility of coach, like I've said before in different times, I think that, and I'm real passionate about, I think the coach has a job. It's not always to win. That's a part of it. You really got that job. Coach one, you wear a lot of hats, and you got to instill the things necessary to be real honest and realistic and try to prepare the person that you're coaching. I think that's very important that a coach, it's tough because you want to win, you want to be looked upon a certain kind of way, but you also have a commitment to the people you're coaching. And that's any age, that's from 5 to 38. I mean, honestly. And if you don't have that commitment, you're going to fail your proteges, your students.
I think, Sam, you spot on with that. That honesty is so important for a coach-player relationship. As you have to be a coach within the moment that you have to be a coach, but outside of coaching, you got to be, some of these kids, you're their dad, you're their friend, you're their big brother, and you got to kind of separate those two when, it's required. You know what I'm saying? Because, the emotions of the game is the emotion of the game. Like you said, you want to coach winning, but for some of us coaches, you also want to coach players to improve and become better. Instead of coaching players to win, sometimes it's good to coach players to be better the next game. You know what I'm saying? Especially in like those blowout games, that's where players are like defeated and they're like, man, they're mad at each other. Yeah. That's the time as a coach where you kind of like, hey, we lost this one, but these are the things we need to do to get better. And the same thing is outside of coaching. You got certain athletes, Sam, as you know, you deal with a lot of them that's in our organization where you also have to do the same thing with them with life. Like you have to prepare them for the next thing because some of our kids, they need that, that strong figure to help them get through in life. And people don't know, but life coaching also helps players with their skills. You know what I'm saying? Because we wear, as athletes, we wear our emotions on our shoulders. And every athlete is different. Some athletes are dealing with life and they play their best games ever. Then there's other athletes where they're dealing with life and they're going deep. They're losing. They're getting worse. So as a coach, that's something that you have to balance.
That's interesting, and I don't know. You always think that, some players like to play with a chip on their shoulder or they play better and life be crazy at home. Some of our best athletes, and we know some, boy, the home life is like, you just like,
crazy.
How you making it? I don't know how you making it. And then you see them, they got a smile, they ready to come out and help when they can help. And you just be like, man, I love you, man, because I know what you're going through. And they sometimes still playing normal, but like you said, you got some players that play like that and they play great, but they still got stuff going on at home. You got to recognize that. I like that you said that. It makes me think a little bit because sometimes you see one player and you see it and you don't realize why they even acting like that. They could be balling You know what I mean? Killing it. And then they act funny sometimes. You just, why are you doing all that? You just had a great game. Now you
Right.
playing at your teammates. It's a lot. You're right.
Yep.
Eugene.
I think from a player perspective, it has to be a sense of trust, right? A player has to be coachable, right? And if there's not a trust with the coach, it's hard for them to really, take in the information that's being delivered. And so it's important for a coach to treat all of their players with respect. And, I had many coaches over the years, and some coaches treat other players better. Let's just face it. And so you can lose respect for a coach like that. But if a coach treats everybody with respect, you know that he's fair. And when your time is called upon, he's not, you know what I'm saying? He's not giving you false information. You can take that in and you can apply it to your game. But some players just can't receive it because of who the coach is. And so it has to be a respectful relationship for the player to reach his maximum ability and for the coach to get the most out of him.
Let me ask you a question, Eugene, just from the player aspect. Let me ask you, let's say you're dealing with a player that's just like, man, he's just difficult. He just difficult. Obviously discipline and other things are factors, but you want to build that trust too. How do you think you go about it?
I think one-on-one meetings, man, really to understand who that kid is, understand where they come from. Sometimes we care about performance, right? We care about, what you can do for me. It's when we talk about college and even high school too, it's grown men, their jobs are based on how well, a minor performs. That's tough, right? But you have to build those relationships. It can't just be a what can you do for me lately type of business. And we understand that's the nature of the business, but it has to be more than that. And so I think one-on-one meetings to really understand who your players are, even if it's all right, let's go out for lunch. Let's talk about something other than football. If you get to know me and really understand how I respond to different things, what my life was like, what motivates me, then you're not just coaching, across the board. You can cater your coaching skills to what you learned about the individual. Everybody don't respond to the same things.
That's interesting. That's like a side step from maybe team bonding, maybe team building. But as far as the individual, you're right, because we don't focus too much on it. We do focus on the individuals, but like you said, sometimes you got to do one-on-one and be like, hey, let's go do this. And that is interesting because sometimes when you do a team thing and you do it inclusive and you think that that's an individual thing for each one, because you think, I'm going to go around and talk to A, and you go talk to A, and hey, now I'm going to talk to B. Yeah, I want to talk to everybody. But that ain't the same. So I appreciate that. That's good.
And that's huge to piggyback off that. You brought back memories when you talked about that one-on-one. I didn't realize the power of that till I got to college, and we had 2-a-days. And before the season started, the coaches would do one-on-one sessions, and they would do certain things to see how you would respond, and they would figure out who they're dealing with, and they would only talk about that in film sessions. And you're an emotional guy. They knew what type of person they were dealing with, and those one-on-one sessions are so huge because you kind of connect with your coach as a player, and then the coach connects with the player as well. So, Eugene, that's definitely a huge part of it. That one-on-one time, it is.
Eugene brought up something really important when he brought up trust, and so lack thereof is a good answer to the question I want to ask. But I know there's more to it than that, and I want to pick your brains. So tell me, why is communication between players and coaches sometimes ineffective?
I can say that one example of that is just like the game they used to play back in the day, telephone, where you start off and you say something to one person, and the next person is supposed to take that message and tell the next person. By the time it gets, you could tell your guard that's in the game at a timeout something, he go on the court and say something else. And that's an example of how things can communication yellow wart. It's got to be overall hands down communication to the point where there's no confusion. If you ask me, I know sometimes even in plays, the play might be something silly, or everybody knows what play mean when you call it. I think communication has to be like everybody gonna basically call you out if you come out there talking something nobody else is speaking.
I say ineffective communication from a coach's standpoint is not setting the bar for your team and just expecting your team to perform. That is the worst ineffective communication a coach can have. From the jump, a good coach always lets the players know what is expected. And as a player, if you know what's expected from your coach, you know what you got to do. So ineffective communication in that aspect can be detrimental to a team when they don't know the expectation. What's the goal? What are we trying to do? I mean, because any coach can just get 10 great players and bring them in the gym and say, hey, we're going to run this play, and the players can use their talent to a certain point. But as a coach, just thinking that the talent is going to get you there and you don't have to talk to your players, you soon find out how the team begins to melt down. Because you're not communicating with your talented players. And when you're not communicating with your talented players or communicating with your players at all, players begin to set their own expectations and they do what they want. And that's a complete meltdown for a team. So for me, ineffective communication from a coach's standpoint is not setting those goals and expectations up for your team.
And in 2008, we were on this like magnificent run to reach the national championship game, and going into the semifinal game, the coach kind of lost his edge. He was, he already thought we had it in the bag, right? And we were like, we kind of waltzed in national TV and got destroyed when we were the heavy favorites. And so what happened was, the cockiness of our coach, it got brought back to each individual player. We walked in there like, all right, we're going to handle this. And next week we're going to win a national championship. So we let our guard down. And so the coach has to be the key motivator and keep everyone focused on the next task at hand. Or if not, you're going to lose a sense of your individual responsibility. You're going to start to think, beyond your opponent, and I've witnessed that firsthand. So ineffective communication, man, it plays a psychological component to players.
Yeah.
So let's talk about a step further. Let's talk about giving players feedback. There are all different types of styles. There's the judging style where the coach is really evaluating exactly what they saw, but not necessarily providing specific instruction. There's the teaching style that's the opposite of that, where you're always instructing, but you're not evaluating what's actually happening. There's positive reinforcement, negative reinforcement. What do you guys think? What kind of feedback is effective? Is it individual, or how do we figure that out?
The most humbling part about being a student athlete is that, especially for football, you sit in a room with 50 to 100 other people while the coach shining this laser across the screen, nitpicking how you messed up. That's humbling, right? We don't even do that in our day-to-day jobs. If we get something wrong, it's mostly one-on-one or small teams. And a good coach can do it all. He doesn't just ridicule players for messing up. Some of it is part of that, but they can teach and they can motivate all in the same time frame. I think it has to be wrapped up. You have to have a heavy arsenal of how you deliver, feedback to each of your players. It's not just, screaming. It's not just overly, being motivational. I think there's a heavy and healthy mix of all of those things.
I agree.
That's definitely a mix. I don't think anyone's got it perfect. I think that it's forever learning or continuing education. I think having the openness to try to get perspectives and try to learn more as a coach is the best way of doing it. I don't think you learn anything to think you know everything. I think you do better with positive than negative. because I think if you're a coach, pretty much everything you're giving out is positive. I mean, there's definitely negativity that happens in the realm of coaching, and if nothing's perfect, tempers come up, emotions happen, passion is a piece. I think that with me, I try to always make it positive because I've had coaches that were, I won't say negative hard, and and it's easy to take negativity from that because you maybe you're not mature enough to get it. But I think that you got to be positive. Some examples, and like you said, also you can't be overly nice or overly too good word for it. I guess just overly symbolic in the way that you handle things with your players. I think you definitely have to have a great arsenal of mindsets on how to deal with them because it's not easy. It's not easy at all. It's one of them things where people say, "Yeah, I coach is not." Honestly, it was years before I even started to try to coach. I mean, I sat there and I had no want. Yeah, I was not one of those parents that would get like on the field or complain to the coach. I was a supportive, go there, check it out, make sure my son had everything. Sons had everything they needed, and be like, and go to the practices and watch from afar, make sure nothing bad was happening to them. But beyond that, I let it go. But what I learned was that each player is different, like you said, Eugene, and you have to want to communicate in a way that's going to better them. You can't want to just yell and scream at them. You know, some of my best players, I'm gonna tell you now, had I took the example of some previous coach and just started screaming at them when maybe they did something irresponsible, maybe they just did. But had I not had the foresight and the experience to realize what type of kid or person I'm dealing with, I could have lost them players. And some of the players have been some of the best humans I have been around in my life, because they dropped the guard, they were people, and they allowed the human to come out. So I push positivity more than anything. And even with my coaches, we have long conversations where, we got to say why we doing it. And it's never not personal, but I definitely think if you're coming out there screaming and yelling, you got an attitude under your breath, you saying, "Oh, that boy's sorry." Yeah, but you saying that to some of the teammates that might hear, I think a lot of that goes a long way and hurts the player. I think you want to diminish them when you're doing that. And if it's a kid or a youth, you are going to.
As a coach, your first job as a coach, I mean, you're going to use all those styles in my book. At some point, you're going to end up using the majority of the styles that's been named. But as a coach, the first thing you're going to be, especially starting the season, you're going to be a great evaluator. And then once you evaluate, you become a great teacher of each and every player that's on your team. But I think the teaching style, of course, every good coach, the Coach K's of the world, the Boeheims, they're great teachers. And a lot of, those Division I athletes always, say, "Hey, I learned a lot from Coach K." To me, that's the biggest thing you can hear from an athlete when they're not saying, "The coach let me score 20 points, let me average 40. But great players say great things about their coaches, and one of the greatest things they can say about a coach is he was a great teacher. Because as a coach, you never stop teaching, especially if you have good IQ and feel for the game. Why would you not want to pass on things that you see and feel and pass it on to your players? As a coach, you're going to give positive reinforcement, negative. I mean, it just depends on the situation. And as a coach, like I said, you have to evaluate and then choose which style is needed at the moment. So that's how I feel on that.
A funny story. I played under Mickey Matthews, really, really good coach, but he was a fiery coach, right? And so we had this real bad practice, the day before. And so we'll watch film of the previous practice. This is around when we were doing two-a-days. We'll watch film, early in the morning, the next morning. And so all the players was like, "Man, we are about to get hammered," right, when he turned on his film, because he already screamed the whole day of practice the day before. So we just knew what was coming. And so we get into the meeting room, everybody's sitting down, and Mickey rolls in ice cream. Right. And you talk about reverse psychology. We're thinking like we're about to get chewed out, and we have an ice cream party. And what that did was like, that made us go out there and we had the best string of practices I ever had at my time at JMU. And I think what I learned the most from that is that, he can get the best out of his players without necessarily, cursing us out. And to me, that's a mark of a tremendous coach.
But you know what? I got a story for that. My coach, Steve Balzer, fiery and angry at the same time.
Right.
His style either broke you or made you great because he demanded the best out of you. And I'm telling you, this dude never cracked a smile hardly. And if he cracked a smile, he was telling you something about your game that he didn't like. But he's smiling as he's saying it. Like Coach Balzer he was a short. I think he's like 5'5". He really couldn't play basketball, but let me tell you, this guy was a mastermind when he came to drawing things up. But his style was he's always fired up, and even when you're making a good play, his fired up is more like it's fiery, like you said, it's real fire, and he never changed that. And he's always about business, though. Like, if you have to talk to him in his office, you need to sit up straight. You need to make sure you're tight. Otherwise, he's gonna. But that translated to practices and games because, once again, your coach is the leader of the ship, and your coach's DNA is gonna. If you're a good coach, it's gonna come off on your players. Man, we ran plays to the T because we knew how Coach Balzer was. He ran a tight shift. Like, come in here, we're getting 2 hours of work, and it's gonna be work. This is what it's gonna be. So sometimes, like you said, for us, it worked. Especially if he talked about a team that we lost to maybe the year before. Like, he goes into detail about how mad he is about the loss. Like how, and you would think as athletes and the players in the film room, we like, man, he's acting like he played. But
right.
That's how he was. Like, he wasn't out there playing, but he put so much of himself into the game. Like, losing, we knew in practice he was going to kick our tails. But it also, one, it kept us in a lot of shape. That's for sure. Two, when we played against great teams that were in our conference, man, we tightened up. And the games were either close or we came out with a victory. So I agree with that. Some of those, that fiery style works and it doesn't work. It just depends.
Not to derail the conversation, but I really want to point out something Coach C said is that, when you walked into his office, he made you sit up straight. And I tell players this all the time, and you learn so much in sports that it's transferable. It's transferable to the real world. And so I bet for you going on your first job interview, you sat up straight. And the interviewer probably noticed that, you know what I mean? And it's things that we take away that it's little things too, right? We can take away and apply to our life that can take us way further than the average person who doesn't necessarily play sports, man. There's so many lessons in that.
Oh man, so many. And to piggyback off that, it's funny you say that because our practices were at 5 a.m, right? All of our practices. And he said you ought to be on the court by 4:30. If you show up at 5 o'clock, 4:50, he was like, hey, if you're early, you're on time. If you're on time, you're late. And he used to kick our tails, but at the same time, when we went to class, we were always early, and he always used to check on us. It became a habit though. And like you said, it transferred to life. Like, you want to be as early as possible for something because you can't say that you're late if you're super early. So definitely it transfers to life for sure.
Absolutely.
Plus, that's a good discipline technique. That's what a lot lack. But yeah.